After the US sent its B-2s to drop so-called bunker-busting bombs on Iran's nuclear sites, Trump claimed to have obliterated its nuclear program. But one man's obliteration is another's short setback. A humiliating leak from the Pentagon saying it may have delayed it by just a few months.
Back to our breaking news now. Sources telling CNN that according to an early U.S. intelligence assessment, the U.S. military strikes on 3 of Iran's nuclear facilities last weekend did not destroy the core components of the country's nuclear program.
Cue fury at a press conference in The Hague this morning. The US president comparing the operation to the deadly nuclear bombs that brought an end to World War II.
Had we not succeeded with that hit ended the war. That hit ended the war. I don't want to use an example of Hiroshima. I don't want to use an example of Nagasaki. But that was essentially the same thing. CNN is scum. MSDNC is scum. The New York Times is scum. They're bad people. They're sick.
The Iranian nuclear program has been put back by these strikes. Years or totally obliterated?
I think basically decades, because I don't think they'll ever do it again.
Not so, according to the leaked interim report. Officials telling the New York Times that while entrances to 2 facilities were sealed off, underground buildings were intact, with Iran retaining control of almost all of its nuclear material. Although just an initial assessment, its words are a body blow to Trump's administration, saying Iran's program could be revived in less than 6 months.
When you talk to the people who built the bombs, understand what those bombs can do, and deliver those bombs, they landed precisely where they were supposed to, so it was a flawless mission.
Flawless.
But still, it was flawless to the US Defense Secretary, who confirmed a leak investigation was underway. So too Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
Here's a fact. The conversion facility, which you can't do a nuclear weapon without a conversion facility, we can't even find where it is, where it used to be on the map.
This comes as the White House delays a briefing on the strikes to Congress scheduled for yesterday to Thursday and Friday, infuriating Democrats already enraged by Trump's decision to bypass Congress and launch his operation without its approval. And while Republican lawmakers are broadly supportive of the strikes, voters are not. The spectre of further military action will be a hard pill to swallow for those who like Trump's campaign promise to end what he calls forever wars, something Vice President J.D. Vance had in mind as he spoke to a crowd in Ohio last night.
And to the Americans who are worried about this becoming a protracted conflict, I think the president solved that very quickly. Not only did we destroy the Iranian nuclear program, we did it with 0 American casualties, and that's what happens when you've got strong American leadership.
But is it all over? The pressure will now be on a diplomatic solution. But this morning, the Iranian parliament voted to suspend cooperation with the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, its speaker saying its program would now accelerate.
The Atomic Energy Organization of Iran is suspending its cooperation with the agency until the security of its nuclear facilities is guaranteed, and Iran's peaceful nuclear program will proceed at a faster pace.
The vote still needs to be approved, though, by Iran's leadership. President Trump had hoped his appearance at the NATO summit in the Netherlands would be a victory lap, fresh off the back of the ceasefire still holding that he brokered between Iran and Israel. Yesterday, he said the countries didn't know what the F they were doing, language excused by a friendly NATO Secretary General this morning, who referred to him as Daddy.
Then Daddy has to sometimes use strong language.
You have to use strong language. Every once in a while you have to use a certain word.
But with the White House having blamed the leak on a, quote, low-level intelligence loser and Congress calling for answers, today the mission he'd hoped accomplished is on shaky ground.
Obliteration, says Donald Trump. Obliteration, says the US Secretary of State for Defense. And obliteration, say White House press officers. Well, is it quite like that? Overnight, of course, the initial battle damage assessment report suggests that all these 12 days of war from Israel and the United States have done in Iran is put back their nuclear ambitions by around 6 months. Well, how's that going down here in Israel today? We went along to talk to the former head of Iranian intelligence in the Israeli army.
I think we should be very careful this moment about the damage assessment. We hardly understand the real damage. I think until some people actually will arrive to the sites and see it by themselves and will be able to reflect the damage, it will be very, very hard to say whether it's 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, and more. And I have to say, in addition, it's not just about what happened in Fordo or Natanz. It's actually, you need to look at the whole of the Iranian nuclear program. It's about Natanz and Fordo, it's about Isfahan and all the conversion issue, it's about the weaponization group and the knowledge that has been taken, and it's about the carrier, about the missiles. So you should look at the whole of the elements in order to say how much actually we took them back.
So what's really going on here? Do we have this familiar situation in war, as you know, of politicians and propaganda, Donald Trump talking about obliteration continuously, and then the real truth comes out via battle damage assessment in due course? Is that really what's happening here?
I think everything is being combined together because everyone has his own agenda and there is the reality. Sometimes it's aligned, sometimes it is to be aligned. And I think, as I said, it's too early, so I'm not sure everybody understands the full picture, but they're trying to create the narrative that actually is relevant for them. Those who oppose the attack try to say that, hey, it was a failure. Those actually that approved the attack trying to say it was a great success. I think that the truth lies between those two, but as I said, we will need to wait and see.
And yet what's agreed, I think, by all of those sides that you mentioned, what's agreed by all sides is this 400 kilograms of enriched uranium is still there in Iran. Where does that lead us?
There was one report that actually said that the Israelis think they know where at least part of these 400 kilos went to, and maybe some of it was bombed in Isfahan. This is the only time that someone actually talked about about knowing what went with those 400 kilos. The Iranian claimed they took it from Isfahan before the attack. It may be true. They could do it. It's, you know, every van can take some of the material. And I think it's a great importance to understand what is going on with it. Because if they have these 400 kilos enriched to 60%, it's quite easy to enrich it to 90%, the percentage that's actually needed for a nuclear bomb. And from there, to actually create all the necessary adjustment to do a nuclear experiment is achievable. If really the intelligence is the Israeli intelligence, and I'm a great believer in the Israeli intelligence, it takes one to know one, know where is the enrichment, the material. So I believe that everybody will go and monitor the side it's in, they know what is going on with it, where maybe it will be taken afterward, and hopefully no operation would be held against it, needed to be held against it, but if there is no other choice, we can't allow the Iranian to hold to this 60% enriched uranium.
It looks then as if certainly Israel and possibly the US, you're going to have to go back again and again and again and bomb again and again and again, aren't you?
Hopefully not. I think we need to understand better how the Iranians are going to act in the near future and how a potential agreement with the Americans will look like. If the Iranians will go back to the nuclear program, no agreement achieved, and actually will try to achieve once again a nuclear weapon, yeah, we will need to go back and do it. I really hope that we create a great damage and the regime understands that it's not just about the nuclear weapon, it's about the regime itself, the security of the regime, and they won't do it in the near future. I think that they will go back to the nuclear program in the longer term. And then, of course, we will have to do some operation in order to stop them.
The signs are not good. I mean, in the last day, the parliament in Tehran, in Iran, has voted to say we won't cooperate with the International Atomic Energy Authority. It sounds like they are bringing down the hatches and they're going to continue a covert program.
But I think we will need to wait and see what is going on with the real negotiation that Arakchi, I believe, will lead by Iran and with a representative of the United States. Honestly, I believe that the negotiation has already been started, maybe a few days ago. And both sides understand what needs to be done. And in order to reach an agreement, on one hand, Iran won't surrender. Iran needs to understand that actually she got something, mainly the lift of the sanction. But at the same time, United States and Israel, and by the way, all the Western world, need to be very, very precise that Iran won't go back to its nuclear program.
Putting all this together then, was the Prime Minister Netanyahu, in his address to the nation yesterday, was he premature, saying, you know, we've removed an existential threat, this is a historic moment for Israel, mission accomplished, frankly?
It is an historic moment to Israel. I think we severely damaged the Iran capability to go on both in nuclear and with the missiles program, but we have a lot we still have a lot to achieve. We still have a lot to do. And I would be very careful about saying how damage we created to the Iranian. We still need to wait and see. But on the other hand, I wouldn't say, hey, we didn't create any damage, what we've been doing over there. No, we did quite a lot of damage. It's not just about the facilities. It's about the confidence of Iran. It's about Iran understanding the intelligence penetration to the main organization, the main people. It's about Israel and the state actually knows everything about going on in Iran.
Thanks very much indeed. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm joined now by RUSI's Daria Dulskova. Daria, firstly, can you think of another time where the Pentagon was so at odds with the president?
Well, so I have to preface all of this by saying that this is still a very preliminary picture being leaked out of a single intelligence agency. So we don't actually have a complete picture of what's actually happened. If the reporting is accurate of what this preliminary DIA assessment said, then yes, this is a fairly limited setback to the program. Several months is, again, not a massive setback to the program, and I'm expecting that the Trump administration was probably hoping for much more significant damage to Iran's capability to enrich, to move forward. And precisely as you point out, the DIA assessment, again, if accurate, would be at odds with what the White House has been saying, which is that the program's been obliterated.
Mm-hmm. And at the heart of this disagreement is how ready Iran is to make a nuclear weapon. What's your assessment of that?
Sure. So there's a few things that we need to look at when we're assessing how close Iran might be to a nuclear weapon. There's a technical capability, which includes the production of fissile materials, that's that enriched uranium that would go inside of a nuclear weapon. And then there's the ability to actually weaponize, so to build the warhead. In terms of the fissile material, we've had now for a while quite a clear picture where Iran had been, certainly before the strikes. And it was clear that they had sufficient enriched uranium, not enriched to the levels that we would expect to see for a nuclear weapon, but not too far off. And they had sufficient amounts of it to produce multiple warheads in a very, very short period of time, within weeks, really. On the actual weaponization, a little bit less clarity around that, but the estimates that I'd seen sort of range within the months to over a year range. What has happened to those technical capabilities in light of the last 2 weeks? A little bit hard to assess, again, because we don't have a complete picture of the extent of the damage to the various parts of the program. But I think the critical aspect to look at as well is not just the technical capability, but the political will to move towards weaponization. And the assessment from the U.S. intelligence community, even a few months ago, and from the International Atomic Energy Agency, had been that Iran had not made the decision to weaponize yet. Whether or not that's changed over the last 2 weeks, I think, is the question that we should be looking at. Has Iran assessed now that, in light of the attacks on its territory, that perhaps, again, it might be more incentivized to move towards a full nuclear weapon deterrent as opposed to just a latent capability?
Well, that's really interesting, because this morning in Iran's parliament, the speaker said that they'd actually be accelerating what they call their peaceful program. What do you make of those words?
So again, we don't know what's left of the program, but assuming that they manage to move some of their material out of their usual facilities, so to save them from the strikes, and if they still have some centrifuges that they can use for enrichment, then yes, they could potentially reconstitute some of their fissile production material. But again, we don't have complete clarity on how close they were to actual weaponization, whether or not they had all the different pieces. But statements like that from Iranian officials, again, raise the question of what has this done to the threat perception. And statements like that are indicative that it might be moving towards a preference to weaponize rather than to open up to discussion and diplomacy.
This is a strategic blunder, really, from Trump, is it not? That he gave them warning that he may or may not strike, and this, in fact, gave Iran time to move those centrifuges with that enriched uranium.
Well, keep in mind that the American strikes on Iranian facilities were preceded by days of Israeli attacks. So the Iranians would have most likely, if they were to move things, they'd move them in response to the Israeli attacks and in anticipation that more attacks would follow.
J.D. Vance said this conflict is over, that the program's been destroyed. Others vehemently disagree with that. Do you think the US has made a rod for its own back here, that it'll now have to keep going in every time it thinks that Iran has in some way crossed the line in terms of proliferation?
I think the last 2 weeks, the U.S. strikes, the Israeli strikes, are, I think, showing us a great example of the limits and the challenges of using military force as a counter-proliferation tool, especially against a program that is as dispersed, as advanced, as hardened as the Iranian nuclear program. Regardless of the degree of damage that's been done to the program, whether it's a setback of 4 months, 6 months, 2 years, at the end of the day, this is a program that the Iranians can reconstitute given time. And what my fear is that not only has the program not been eliminated, you began going back to my earlier comments, you've now incentivized the Iranians to actually move ahead with the program. So, I mean, I would struggle to call this a strategic win from a non-proliferation perspective.
And this morning, Donald Trump said that he had set back the program by decades. I mean, what do you make of that?
Again, I don't know what intelligence the White House is working off of. Again, the DIA assessment that was leaked yesterday, with the caveats that, again, very preliminary, is probably quite low confidence, but they had put it at several months. The Israelis, I think I read, have assessed that the program's been set back by about 2 years. That's in response to the U.S. strikes and the Israeli strikes. But again, I don't know what intelligence the White House is or isn't working with.
Daria Dulskova, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thanks.